Hello, welcome to our final session of the Seneca's Human Relationships series. It's really a shame I'm going to miss it. Today's part is particularly beautiful. It deals with philosophy, and I've fallen in love with Seneca's thoughts. As if I hadn't fallen in love before, right? But today, very particularly. You know, it reminds me a lot of that story of the ugly duckling. Keeping things in perspective. The duckling only stops considering itself an ugly duckling and discovers it's a swan when it sees another, much larger, much more beautiful, already an adult, but it notices some resemblance. When you see someone speak so affectionately and intensely about philosophy, it gives you a sense that, even if you're the tiniest, youngest member, you have some kinship with this family. Anyone who has this seed of philosophy within themselves feels very comfortable and fulfilled with these thoughts. I'm sure you're going to like it. Shall we go? Just to recap a bit of what we talk about every week, Lucius Seneca is a philosopher who was born in Cordoba and died in Rome. He was born in 4 BC, and he will die in 65 AD. He was ordered to be killed, executed, and he himself cut his veins in a bathtub by Nero's command, whom he had educated. He was Nero's tutor from his childhood, pre-adolescence. He wrote an enormous amount, and his work was very well preserved with very little lost. He left behind 124 letters, 12 dialogue. There was a 13th that was lost in 9 tragedies. In other words, like Plato's own work, although Plato's is in smaller quantity, there are some authors whose works history has preserved for some reason, when for many others, everything was lost. Many of the Stoics, for example, had their works entirely lost. However, Seneca, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius, with Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius leaving behind only a single work, Epictetus was compiled by his disciple Flavius Arrian. Seneca left many. And this is the last of his works, the letters to Lucilius, which we are discussing. And today we will conclude the section that pertains to philosophy. We talked about friendship, eloquence, death, and today, finally, the letters on philosophy, which are very beautiful and contain some extremely creative descriptions, some very deep and even poetic descriptions. I hope you fall in love, along with me, with these beautiful letters. It begins with this passage that I found very beautiful and have even quoted to you at some point in the past. Yes, my dear Lucilius, claim ownership of your being. Gather and secure the time that has been taken from you, stolen, or that you have let slip away. In other words, claim your life, because time is synonymous with life. Take hold of the reins of your being, and don't let them steal that most precious wealth you have, if not the only one, which is the time that has been given to us on this stage of life, to deliver our message, to tell our story, to leave a mark that makes a difference to the world and to ourselves. Therefore, claim ownership of your being, and don't waste or let anyone steal your time. The most scandalous waste of time we suffer is due to negligence. In other words, it wasn't even that this precious thing was stolen from us. We were the ones who threw it away, as if it were nothing. We throw away pieces of our life. When at a certain moment we have little time left to live, perhaps our conscience will suffer when we remember this. How many pieces of life do we throw away by not knowing how to use time well? We spend most of our lives doing things poorly, a good part of our lives doing nothing, and the rest doing something different from what would be necessary. In other words, in all 3 cases, 3 different ways of throwing life away. When we stop to recall everything we remember from our past, we'll realize it's very little compared to the number of years we've lived. What did we do with the rest? What isn't recorded in our memory, because it wasn't done with present awareness, wasn't done with the necessary intensity, wasn't done in the right direction, all of this that was nothing is lost in the nothingness of unconsciousness, of forgetfulness. So, unfortunately, most of our life is wasted. And I recall having mentioned to you in a lecture that Plato, in fact, argued about this. How can we want to continue living after death if before death we throw so much life away? It's something like that. We can have the moral standing to seek life after death if we have made the most of the one given to us before death. And none of us are in that position. Name me a man who knows how to recognize the value of a day and understands that he dies a little each day. How rare that is. Name me one who knows the value of a day. Imagine this. The life expectancy of a Brazilian man today, the last time I checked, was 765 years. For someone who lives only this, a day is not a small thing. It's quite significant. We could say that a day is insignificant for someone who lived 1,000 years, but that's not the case. So our days are scarce and valuable, and we let them slip away into nothingness, to the point where we can't really say what we did in our lives just a week ago. Last Wednesday, we stop and think, how come? I don't remember. It was so recently, yet we've already forgotten. Do you know why? Because perhaps we didn't do anything worth noting. Perhaps we haven't taken ownership of our time. Because when consciousness takes hold of time, it endures. And he continues, we deceive ourselves when we see death in front of us. It is largely behind us. In other words, in the past. Those days that have already passed bring us closer to death. Remember that in our last meeting we talked about that example of the hourglass. That what causes death is not the last grain that falls from the hourglass, but all the previous grains that have already fallen. And they made that one the last. What makes death imminent is not how many days are left until it, but how many days have been left behind. And many of them we don't use well. Be the owner of all your hours. In other words, take possession of all your hours, and you will be less a slave to tomorrow if you become the master of today. Nothing belongs to us, only time is ours. In other words, the greatest jewel we all have is life itself. We love life, we don't want to lose it, but we don't have a clear understanding that time is synonymous with life. When some people are in delicate situations, facing an incurable illness, and they're told, you have a month, you have 2 months, you have a year to live, it seems that in this moment of collision between life and death, consciousness awakens and we realize the value of a day, of a week, of a month. Until then it was an immense waste. Life thrown away as if it were an incredibly abundant resource, which it truly is not. And even if it were, life is not something to be discarded. It is a very precious asset. Time is the only asset that nature has given us. However, anyone can deprive us of it. When you are born, and even before your birth, according to the Greeks, Zeus turns the hourglass, and the grains of your time begin to fall. This is what you have. It's the stage that was open for you in the world, for you to deliver your message, for you to fulfill yourself as a human being. And this stage, it is yours. And it can only be taken from you if you give it away. And we constantly give it away. How common it is for us to let others play with our time as they see fit. That they exploit our time with trivialities. That they fill our time with victimhood, trivialities, sometimes even crude things. That we allow the vulgar information surrounding us to steal a lot of our time. In other words, it's a treasure and it's ours. But it can be stolen. But generally, it's not a forced theft. It's a theft where you hand the jewel to the thief. And it's what we do with our time. There's a passage from Egyptian mythology that I find very beautiful, which shows Nut and Geb. Geb, who is the earth, is represented in a masculine way. I find that quite interesting. Useless, starry sky, is feminine. All nutrients, the roots of life for the Egyptians, are not in the earth, they are in the sky. And between the sky and the earth, there is a god, Shu, who represents time. Shu is time and Tefnut is space. They are the two, let's say, the two coordinates of manifested life. And Shu pushes the sky upwards and creates a space between the sky and the earth. And he is time, which is this stage he opens for you to step in and play the role that corresponds to you on the stage of life. And we should consider this effort of Shu to open the sky and the earth and create a space, a chronological space for us to live our lives as the greatest of all gifts. The flaws of the body. When more severe, they appear. In other words, the more severe the illness becomes, the more it shows. There's no way to disguise it. The flaws of the soul, when more severe, hide themselves. That's curious. A person with a small flaw who is somewhat naive and hasn't even noticed it yet, everyone sees. From the moment she allows these flaws to take root, the more she disguises them, the more she hides them. They don't remain the sample for everyone. There begins to be a need to disguise. This already means that to all the evils and flaws, you've added the flaw of deceit. In other words, it became even more serious. The more we are affected by the diseases of the soul, the less we feel them. We start losing our sense of shame. And that becomes our natural way of responding to life. We feel ashamed of our small flaws. When they become large, not anymore. They become our way of seeing the world. When we are in light sleep, we still notice that we are falling asleep or are asleep. But deep sleep erases everything. See what a beautiful metaphor. Deep sleep, in other words, distancing from the reality of life, distancing from the wakefulness of consciousness, at this moment all moral criteria are erased, all human discernment is erased. He no longer realizes that he is sleeping. In the same way, a person entrenched in deep vices no longer perceives their own vices. Why do we never confess our vices? Because we are still dominated by them. Pay attention. Sharing your own dreams means that you are awake. Recognizing your own vices means you are cured of them. In other words, if you approach someone and say, "Look, you have a strong tendency towards laziness. I am definitely not asleep." When she starts to say, "It's true, I've been fighting against it, you can rest assured," the healing process is underway. The conscience has detected it and will now fight until victory is achieved. That's why Socrates, the great philosopher, used to say, "I only know that I know nothing." This is certainly a man prepared to acquire wisdom, because he realized, saw, and acknowledged his own ignorance. And so it is with those who are on the verge of healing. Realize, live, and acknowledge your own vice. And now you have the tools to fight against it. But only philosophy will awaken us. Only it can shake us from our heavy slumber. Remember that equation I always mention to you, that life is nothing more than moving from ignorance to wisdom, to get as close as possible to the absolute wisdom attainable for a human being. That is life, and philosophy is the love of wisdom. So you, in any case, you will have to walk from ignorance to wisdom. Now, look, if you don't love wisdom, if you're not motivated to move towards it, it's much more complicated. Philosophy means love of wisdom. Philosophy is what awakens in you the love, interest, and motivation to walk towards that destination you would have to reach anyway. Is like that coach who runs alongside the competitor outside the track, encouraging and showing the glow closer to their goal, getting closer to it, taking one step closer each time. Therefore, philosophy allows us to awaken. It is a powerful ally. Only it will awaken us, according to Seneca. If you were sick, you would first take care of healing yourself before attending to your business and obligations. Of course, in sick, am in pain, am not well. No, first let me check my bank account. No sensible person would do such a thing. The first thing he will ensure is the healing of your body. Remove the obstacles, then, and dedicate yourself to the pursuit of wisdom, which is only achieved when the mind is not preoccupied with anything else. In other words, you recognize the illness of the body and prioritize healing it. Recognize the illness of the soul, which are your vices, your flaws, those rough edges that need to be smoothed out, and prioritize this healing above any other business. Because only then can you truly begin to heal those voids, those wounds that are our flaws. Defects have an etymological root related to deficit. It comes from lack, from a hole that has not yet been filled with virtues. A defect is a shadow, a place where the light has yet to penetrate. Therefore, we must heal these voids, we must heal these wounds as a priority over anything else in life. Philosophy is sovereign. Decide your time. It is not you who gives alms to philosophy. It is not a secondary activity, but essential. As an absolute master, it is present and gives the orders of your life. It orders your life. They say that Plato, on one occasion, was conversing with another philosopher, and this philosopher challenged him to explain why philosophy was necessary for a weight carrier, like those at the port, for a man who worked with wood, or for a man who worked the land. Plato supposedly explained how, in each profession, philosophy made that craft more dignified and more productive. In other words, philosophy is not something you do when you have nothing else to do. Philosophy is what adds value to anything you do. It commands and qualifies. If there's something that does you good, a medicine that gives you a good health condition, you take it everywhere you go because it improves your response to circumstances. Why wouldn't you do the same with philosophy, which enhances your response to all circumstances? It makes no sense to leave the best we have in our lives locked away at home when we face difficulties. Philosophy declares itself to everything that is not it. I was not made to accept the time you have left. It is up to you to accept what I will assign to you. In other words, philosophy tells a person, look, I'm not interested in the leftovers of your life. I want your life as a whole, and it'll tell you what to do with it. And if you accept this guidance, you take great strides towards wisdom. It is a powerful tool to accompany us side by side in every step. Look at how beautiful this vision of Seneca is. The lover of wisdom finds, in the time that their life lasts, the same that the gods find in eternity. Isn't that beautiful? Within a Roman polytheistic culture, what is he saying? That a man who lives the right way finds as much fulfillment in the little bit of life he's been given as the gods find in eternity. In other words, nothing is lacking for him. He possesses everything that the best of a conscience can grasp. If you know how to use life well, there is a point where the wise person is superior to the gods. If fear spares both, meaning if neither feels fear, the gods owe it to their immortal natures. The wise owe it to their work. Be it the way he interacts with life, what he accomplishes, the marks he leaves along the way, the generosity, the dedication at every step, these give him as much security and tranquility as the eternity of their nature gives to the gods. He knows, well, if this body is not eternal, because no body will be eternal, my works will be. I find it amazing how Seneca himself, as I mentioned to you earlier, is aware that his works will outlast him. The wise person has this certainty. What I leave for the world is a piece of eternity. This cannot be taken from them unless they give it up. What a wonder it is to have the frankness of a man and the tranquility of a god. In other words, this ability to be constantly learning and sharing. This frank vision that gradually unveils a little more of the truth. And in the same way that he discovers, he shares with those who wish to receive. And at the same time, the tranquility of a god, to know that what he is, nothing and no one can take away from him. What he inhabits, yes, that will be taken away, because it is part of the laws of nature. Everything in nature is transient, but what he is not. It is grounded in enduring things. The incredible strength of philosophy is capable of repelling all the attacks of life's setbacks. In other words, it is capable of facing all difficulties with dignity and guiding you to the other side as a human being. Either philosophy dodges these setbacks of fate, or it disperses them and is capable of sending them back to their sender. In other words, philosophy enables a person to give the best possible responses in the face of life's adversities. It compiles the best responses that have ever been given. It awakens a person's consciousness so they can also find their best responses. In other words, it is a tool, perhaps the most secure and effective, to get us to the other side of the road without allowing ourselves to be corrupted along the way. According to Plato, as Seneca says, men die, but humanity itself, the mold of man, which is an idea, endures and does not undergo any suffering. In other words, the endurance of the soul as an idea, which nothing and no one can corrode because it does not possess a body. And what is not subjected to time and space cannot be corrupted. It does not obey the laws of matter. Our body is, for the soul, a burden that is imposed upon it. It crushes and keeps it in chains when philosophy does not come to its rescue to make it contemplate the spectacle of nature and lead it from earth to heaven. It's very beautiful. In other words, if philosophy does not come to the soul's aid, it is crushed by the weight of the body, with its needs, its complaints, its thirsts, its endless appetites. It is crushed. Plato speaks of something very similar to this, which is the theory of the soul. A prisoner, trapped inside, and we pamper the jailer instead of educating him to discipline himself, open the door, and give freedom for our soul to express itself in the world. We pamper the jailers of our soul. The wise man, as well as the one who is on the path of wisdom, that is, the philosopher, relates to his body, but is separated from it by what he possesses that is best, the thoughts that he directs to the summit, to the highest point. Just like the soldier who took the oath, he sees the duration of life as a time of service. In other words, I enlisted to come into the world to serve, to give the best of myself, to offer my service. In other words, you stop looking at things and asking, what use are they to me? And you start looking at the world and asking, how can I serve it? This is Seneca's perspective in our case. We came into the world to serve it, and through this, we grow and perfect ourselves as human beings. And that is the glory of human life. The place that divinity occupies in the world is similar to that of the soul in a person. In other words, divinity holds a place within the world very similar to the relationship of the soul with the body. Matter corresponds to the body. Therefore, it is necessary for the inferior to obey the superior. Just as divinity governs matter, the soul should govern the body, in the image and likeness of one another. And this dominance is not to crush or destroy it, but the soul that guides the body takes much better care of the body than if it were to indulge all its whims according to its lack of control. Just as the divinity that governs the universe leads it much better than if this universe were left to wander aimlessly according to its own impulses. In other words, in both the macrocosm and the microcosm, the same idea applies. We are the microcosm, where our soul functions as the divinity of this world, which is our material life. The human soul is as great as it is strong, resisting both attacks and caresses, not submitting to good or bad fortune, but rising above both unhappiness and happiness. Decent in its supreme beauty, sound and sober in its strength, unwavering and fearless. Plato used to say that courage is maintaining the rule of reason in situations of fear and desire, because both risk stealing our own identity, robbing us of our dignity, of our human nature. Aristotle comes along and adds, saying, look, desire is more threatening than fear. Imagine, if you're standing in front of a lion, there's no doubt in your mind that it's dangerous. But in the face of seduction, of a vulgar appeal, sometimes you don't realize it's dangerous. And it's a risk to your dignity, sometimes even greater. Thus, the soul is dignified and rises above temptations that might corrupt it. In its purity, it is divine. It is dignified and asserts itself over circumstances, allowing nothing to tarnish it. If you know how to find it, you are that. Realize that it is your essence, what you might call your true identity. In other words, you are like this. With all the layers stripped away, this is who you are. The supreme good cannot diminish, nor can virtue retreat. The soul merely changes form. Everything it touches, it shapes and colors with its image. Actions, friendships, a home, everything becomes beautiful through it. In other words, the awakened soul, when in command of life, leaves a luminous trail. Wherever it goes, it becomes more beautiful than it was before. It is not only harmony, but also a harmonizer in the world. That's why I love that biblical phrase that says, "By your works you shall be known." You see a luminous trail, and you say, "A true human being has passed here, whose soul was in command." The soul beautifies everything it touches. Everything done under the guidance of true human reason is solid and eternal. Everything you do, guided by true human reason, that is, with an awakened soul and elevated consciousness, everything you do is solid and eternal. That's why Seneca would sometimes look at himself and say, "Well, my work will endure." Because look at how solid it is, how it is crafted with the most upright intentions, with the deepest desire to serve humanity, with the most appropriate will to be a conductor, a mediator of the voice of the gods in the world. Therefore, it will endure. Based on what it was founded upon, it cannot be corroded. It's like a sculptor who is able to carve a statue from an extremely hard stone. He says, "This will endure. It will be known by the future. You know why? Because it is on a very solid foundation, the temple will not be able to erode it." The same goes for teachings. When your foundations are virtues, when they are values, when it is wisdom, they are as solid as a statue carved from the hardest stone in the world. And you can look at it and say, "This will endure. Time will not be able to erode it." And he was aware of this. Therefore, human reason is the arbiter of good and evil. It knows how to tell you what leads to human improvement and points out that this is good. What dehumanizes and brutalizes you and points this out as evil. If it is not awakened, you have no reference, and you become a plaything in the hands of trends, fashion, the collective. If some human goods could be superior to others, I would preferably choose those that are seemingly accompanied by many difficulties, those that are surrounded by charms and sweetness. In other words, if there is any good, that allows you to be more solid, at peace. If there were something material capable of giving you that security, I would prefer the one that protects you in stormy situations, rather than the one that protects you in a situation of extreme calm. In other words, we must consider that virtues are valuable because they not only bring us peace and serenity in moments of calm, but they are also a powerful shield in times of greater difficulty. I once shared a story online, not sure if you all got to see it, about a certain time in China in the past. There was a painting contest to find the artwork that best represented peace, and several paintings were presented. And the emperor would be the one to choose the winning painting. And there were two paintings that were very similar and extremely beautiful, and he hesitated, uncertain about those two. One of them was a nest of beautiful birds, happily perched on a branch of a tree, in the middle of a wonderful garden, where everything was beautiful and everything was at peace. The other was this same nest of birds, nestled comfortably on a branch of a tree, in a landscape where the wind was fierce, snow was falling, there was fire on the horizon, everything was adversity. And in the end, the emperor chose the second one. The birds at peace amidst all the adversity. He said exactly that. The great characteristic of peace is to envelop and protect you when the world is in the midst of chaos. True peace, the serenity it provides, this peace of conscience, this alignment with oneself, this peace of being, in harmony with heaven and earth. This protects you in all environments, but especially in turbulent environments. It is the most powerful shield. This story is very inspiring and deserves some deep reflection. What is happiness? It is the perpetual serenity and calm. You might say, no, serenity is pleasure, it's joy. There is no pleasure or joy if you don't have serenity, a tranquil state of mind, where you are at peace with yourself, where you owe nothing to anyone, neither to heaven nor earth, where you are prepared for any moment. If death were to cut your path short, you would go in peace, because you consider your journey to be a worthy one. There is nothing to be ashamed of, there is nothing to fear, and you have no debts, neither with yourself nor with the world. Therefore, happiness would be perpetual serenity and calm. And we can only achieve it if we elevate our soul, remaining faithfully attached to its resolutions. In other words, firmly attached to the decisions of an awakened, elevated, and noble soul. Governed by right reason, by human reason. This noble essence of ours, which is so fond of this serenity, stands above the storms of the world. And that can place us above the hurricane. It can take us away from the clamor of the world. We can be in the world without being affected by it. If we possess this precious happiness, the happiness of the soul, that nothing and no one can take away from us. Some traditions say not even death. To add happiness to the need for pleasure is like someone thinking that daylight is insufficient and that it requires the reinforcement of a candle. See how interesting this is. Someone thinking that human happiness, which is this tranquility, this harmony of being with oneself, is incomplete if you don't add some pleasures, is like someone at high noon thinking they need a bit more light and coming with a candle. If you have joy, if you have pleasures, that's fine. But if you don't have them, your happiness, as serenity of conscience, as peace, as the tranquility of being at peace with life, is just as grand. It doesn't need another candle to illuminate it. Therefore, it does not depend on pleasures. Although it does not reject them, human happiness is not dependent on pleasures. See how beautiful this passage is, attributed to have been written by Lucilius. It's a beautiful paragraph. Ancient wisdom, they say, only prescribed what should be done or avoided. And the men of that time were far superior to us. Since scholars took the first place, good men have become rare. This virtue, simple and accessible, has turned into a hermetic science, reserved only for intellectuals, and it only teaches us to make dissertations, not to live. Look how curious, folks, the relevance of something like this. When did knowledge stop teaching us how to live and start only teaching us to write dissertations? When did knowledge stop guiding us towards a sense of life worthy of a human being? It stopped shaping us in values to be worthy of our human condition and started pointing us only towards an accumulation of knowledge in quantity without any depth. Take a good look. This is a letter that must have been written around 60 AD, because it was Seneca's last work when he, in hiding, expected to be killed at any moment. In other words, 60 AD. And the relationship between man and knowledge was already seen in these terms. If they could know what would happen almost 2,000 years later, where what we call knowledge guarantees absolutely nothing in relation to life. And this is a critical moment where we need to see this. We are called to observe this carefully. We limit ourselves to informing and accumulating, to technical training at most. But forming for life, forming to give human responses to life, no. We no longer consider this something that can be done, nor something that should be done. One of the causes of our misfortunes is that we live by following the example of others. We don't guide ourselves by reason, but let ourselves be carried away by customs. We would refuse to adopt on our own a custom embraced by just a handful of people. Fashion becomes so widespread that we follow it as if quality were synonymous with quantity. We think a dead-end street is the right path simply because many are heading that way. What an incredible thing, folks. Incredible. In other words, man has delegated the right to live and is being lived, being guided by the masses, because in this way he feels a sense of belonging, feels less fear, and believes he faces less risk, when in fact it's not true. When the crowd is heading towards an abyss, it's better to take a different path alone. This need to be accepted at any cost, this fear of confronting the opinions of the collective, makes a person a slave to the worst kind of ignorance and condemned to the greatest and deepest of abysses. This reminds me of another passage by Epictetus, the other great Stoic, where in his Enchiridion he says the following: "Be wary of social conventions. The new is not necessarily good. Support only what has a sense of justice, humanity, equality, etc." In other words, don't go with the crowd. Don't believe that just because the majority does something, it makes it true. If you look at the great periods of history, those who believed the world was round, who believed in the earth's diameter, who believed in many things were few. There was a crowd that said no. And yet, it was those few who were right. History was never made by the masses. Be very careful with this tendency to hand over the reins of your life to the latest fad. Out of fear of confronting this rule that is almost like a steamroller. Out of fear of forging your own path. And so we delegate the very act of living. We are being lived, and this is very sad and a sure path to unhappiness. We used to think the worst bunch were the peddlers of gossip, but now we see it's the peddlers of vices. What they say is harmful, and even if it doesn't have an immediate effect, it leaves its seeds in our soul. In other words, be wary of those who are sellers of vices, seeking accomplices. To be able to live with him, to descend with them into this quagmire. Be careful, because we often think that only what we eat can intoxicate us. What we ingest on the emotional and mental plane also causes an intoxication that somehow limits our life, perhaps even nullifies it, maybe even takes away our chances of living with dignity or even surviving. Therefore, we need to close our ears to pernicious words. Remember Ulysses in the Odyssey, who, knowing they would pass by the sirens, ordered to be tied to the mast. It's kind of like this. When we pass by vulgar voices, it's wise to tie ourselves to the upright mast of our principles and values so we aren't swept away. Do not overestimate your strength. Know that we are still very impressionable. Cultivate the habit of surrounding yourself with positive voices more and more. Friendships that tell you things that can mutually elevate each other's consciousness. Ignore the voices that call you to all the abysses that exist around the world. Letting your body lean forward on a descent and leaning it back on an ascent is making a pact with evil, Lucilius. In both cases, human reason prevails over the Buddhist tendencies and saves it. Look how interesting, the body by inertia. When you're climbing a mountain, it seems like the body is trying to say, I don't want to go, it's dragging me, because it tends to lean back. Then you realize, no, if I lean forward, it becomes easier. That gravity itself pushes me forward. Reason asserts itself over the body. When you're going downhill, the body tends to lean forward, making the movement easier. You realize, if I go like this, I might just roll all the way down. And as a matter of common sense, sometimes very subtle, that you don't even notice, soon enough you're leaning your body back on the descent as a safety measure. In other words, these two simple actions are moments where reason, where a moment of sensibility, prevailed over the Buddhist inertia. So he says, when we give in to the Buddhist inertia, it's like making a pact with evil. It means working towards regression, towards destruction, to sabotage our own path, like a Penelope weaving her tapestry in every night going back to unravel her thread. In her case, it was beneficial, but not for us. We unravel the thread of our evolution as human beings because we are afraid. One of the things we fear the most is becoming the human being we dream of being. We fear what it will deprive us of and the commitments it will generate for us. And so we sabotage ourselves. Well, and that's the end of our book, which I hope has been a good reflection for you. I truly loved this book, especially the final part. I thought it was a golden ending. And you realize that these are very simple things, and it's hard to believe they were written so long ago. Because it seems like they were published in today's newspaper, and in fact, they would fit perfectly if they were published in tomorrow's newspaper. Because they are very, very present, very useful. Do not fall into the illusion, as I have mentioned several times, of thinking that what has evolved over 2,000 years is humanity. What has evolved is the machine. The man who operates the machine today might be less prudent than the man who drove the Roman chariot back then. The chariot evolved, became a jet plane, became a Mustang. But the man who drove the chariot back then might have been more fraternal, more self-controlled, less selfish. We are out of sync, where for some reason we think evolution is about things evolving, not about human beings. And I reiterate, nature doesn't need us to do things. She is capable of doing them all, alone and with great perfection. She needs us to build ourselves, because there is a law, which is free will, that prevents anyone from doing it for us. Therefore, what we came to do is the construction of ourselves. And we cannot fall behind in this crucial duty, which is what is expected of us. It is what we came to do in the world. I hope Seneca serves as a good inspiration for you. Thank you very much.